Well, good morning or afternoon, depending on what time you're listening to this. But this is a short lesson I did a few Sundays ago, and I wanted to go ahead and record it. It's got some interesting things. Many times when I'm going through studying different items, I will come across something that I don't think the majority of believers, Christians, have heard. And that's kind of what I did with this one. And so as we get into it, hopefully it'll be something you haven't heard before as well and can make your decision on it. So, with that said, let's look at Matthew 28, verses 2 through 4. And this is in the Net version, which is one of my favorites. It says, "Suddenly there was a severe earthquake, for an angel of the Lord, descending from heaven, came and rolled away the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were shaken and became like dead men because they were so afraid of him." Okay, so as we look at this, there are three things that occurred in the early morning hours of Sunday. And what are the three things? Let's just go back through them. There was an earthquake, but it wasn't just an earthquake, it was a severe earthquake that shook the ground incredibly. And this is actually the second earthquake that we have seen in the last few days of the life of Christ. The first one actually marked the moment of Jesus' death. And of course, this one describes an earthquake when the angel came and rolled away the stone as well. And so the second item is the angel came from heaven and rolled away the stone. Now, the stone was sealed um, and then rolled into this area that would block entrance. The stone was extremely or incredibly heavy and so forth. So this angel made easy work out of moving the stone. And the third thing that we see is the fear that came upon the Roman guard. Um, they became as dead men, and if you look at the Greek, it's kind of interesting. One definition of this is they were literally scared stiff. Now, if you think about different times when Christ is visible after his resurrection here, you'll notice that people have kind of the same reaction. Think about Revelation, and Jesus is described there in kind of the same manner, and it just takes John aback, and he's seeing the glory of God in this case, a little bit different, but anyhow, the glory of God caused this to have a severe reaction for John. And then the next verse that I want to look at is John 20, verse 1. It says, "Now very early on the first day of the week," so this is Sunday morning still, and it says very early, so it's before the sun came up. In fact, it says while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been moved away from the entrance. Now, when it says still very dark, it's saying that you could see three clouds when, I'm sorry, three stars. And when those stars, when you could no longer see three stars in the sky, that became daybreak. But this case, it was a full moon because this is Passover is around the full moon time, and so she was able to see from that viewpoint. But she arrived first at the tomb. And that's my question. Who arrived first? You'll notice a little later that several women went to the tomb as well, but they were two separate visits. So the first one that arrives at the scene is Mary Magdalene. And what did she find when she got there? She found the stone rolled away and the tomb empty. So apparently she stuck her head in and looked around and did not see the body of Christ. And she also did not see an angel, and so she assumed that the body had been removed or taken to a new location. And then she just left. She did not see what she wanted to see, and disappointed, she left. And then I want to look at, we looked at the first verse. I want to look at the verses 2 through 10 in John 20 as well. And it says that she, that's Mary Magdalene, went running to Simon Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved. Many times authors will work themselves into a passage by doing something like this. They don't want to be noted that it's them, but they want to work something in there where you know something else is happening with another person. And so the other disciple whom Jesus loved is John, and told them they have taken the Lord from the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. Then Peter and the other disciples set out to go to the tomb. So they start taking off running, and the other disciple, that would be John, ran faster than Peter. We assume that he's younger as well. But anyhow, he outruns Peter, and they reach the tomb first. So Peter gets there after John. He bent down and saw the strips of linen cloth lying there, but he did not go in. In some of the commentaries I read, they said that that would be possible that John was a Levite because they could not touch dead bodies and so on and so forth, and that might be why he did not go in. That's just an assumption. We don't know that for sure. Verse 6 says, Then Simon Peter, as usual, he followed him, but he arrives and goes right in into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen cloth lying there, and the face cloth which had been around Jesus' head, not lying with the strips of linen cloth, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who had reached the tomb first, that would be John, came in and he saw and believed. Now that's important because in the other gospel, I believe it's Mark, it says that Peter marveled at this. And marveled usually means you're thinking about it, you're going through it in your head. And so I believe here John believed, but Peter was still kind of trying to think through it all. Verse 9 says, For they did not yet understand the scripture that Jesus must rise from the dead. So the disciples went back to their homes. Now that's kind of interesting. They went back to their houses or their homes after seeing that Jesus was no longer in the tomb. I would have thought they would have gone back to the disciples, the rest of the disciples, or called a meeting or something, but they went back to their homes. And then it says, we just read this, I'm sorry, but you notice what I highlighted here, the strips of linen cloth lying there. In verse 6, he saw the strips of linen cloth lying there. And then in verse 7, near the end, it says strips of linen cloth rolled up in a place by itself. What do you think of the Shroud of Turin? I got on Facebook YouTube the other day to look at some things, and boy, there were just videos left and right about the Shroud of Turin, and 90% of them are saying it's true. But when I look at the scriptures, it doesn't say anything about a shroud being wrapped around Christ. It only says the strips of linen cloth, and it says it 3 times in these 3 verses. So, true or false? Well, I think it's false. Scripture, like I said, never mentions a shroud. It always mentions strips of linen cloth. And strips of cloth is what Christ was wrapped in as a newborn, which I kind of found interesting. Many times they would try and wrap babies so that they're in that fetal position and nice and tight, and they can't, scratch their faces and all this type of stuff. But the linen cloth was still rolled up. Now, so think of it as rolls. Okay, it's still rolled up. And so that really indicates that when Jesus resurrected, he went right through the grave clothes. And so when we look even at the face cloth, I've heard people talk about how it was folded. It does not say that it's folded. It said it was rolled up in a place by itself. Now, rolled up to me means he went right through it, but then he picked it up and placed it in another location. But I see no indication that this face cloth was folded and so forth. And then in Luke, I want to look at this. And when they, that's the women, returned from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed like pure nonsense to the apostles, and they did not believe them. Now, when we put Matthew and Luke kind of together, it's kind of interesting. We get that Mary Magdalene told the two apostles, Peter and John, and the other women actually reported to the other 9 apostles, but they did not believe them. Now, what's interesting to me is Luke uses a interesting word for pure nonsense. He uses the word laros, and that describes a patient who is sick and delirious from pain, delirious being the key word. It says that they saw these women as speaking pure nonsense, or they were delirious from the pain of maybe grieving, and that drove them to say things that just were delirious, nonsense. And so that's how the apostles took this. And then in verse 14 and 15, it says, when she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not know that it was Jesus. This is Mary Magdalene. Jesus said to her, woman, why are you weeping? And then it says, who are you looking for? Because she thought he was the gardener. Okay, so did Mary Magdalene recognize Jesus? Well, not immediately. She thought he was the gardener first and the one who had moved the body. Now, why did she not recognize him immediately? There's a lot of different theories out there. One might say that she had tears in her eyes and could not make out who it was, because Jesus does mention, why are you weeping here? And so that's a possibility. But I want you to notice that that's not the case in other places where the 2 men on the road to Emmaus, they did not recognize Christ at that time either. And so this delay in recognition happens at several post-resurrection appearances. So it's thought that his body had changed to some degree, and that identification therefore was not immediate. They could not recognize him totally. I think they questioned in their mind, is it him, at least on the road to Emmaus? But they did not recognize him totally. And so in the next verse, we have Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned and said to him in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher or rabbi. So what caused Mary Magdalene to recognize Jesus? Well, he called her by name. Is that significant? Are there any scriptures that talk about Jesus calling people by name? And I think there is. When Jesus is noted as the Good Shepherd, which is in John 10, he calls his sheep by name, and look at this, they know his voice. And so when Jesus spoke to Mary Magdalene, she recognized his voice, and just like it says in John 10. So maybe there was something in the tone of his voice, or maybe he pronounced her name in a certain way. But either way, she knew his voice, and she knew who he was at the speaking of her name. And she does call him. Now, it's not in the English here, but it is my teacher or my rabbi. And so there's a personal relationship. There's a personal recognition there. She didn't just know it was a person named Jesus, but she knew him as a personal friend. And it's very important to note this is the first appearance of the resurrected Messiah. And notice it's to a woman and not to a man. By Jewish law, women could not serve as witnesses. And so they could not appear in a court of law as a witness, and so on and so forth. And so, by Jewish law, this is kind of interesting that the gospel writers would put this in that she was the first to see the resurrected Messiah. And then Jesus said to her, Mary, okay, we just read that. Many claim that Jesus did not rise from the dead and claim the Gospels are fabricated. And I want to use what we just read to kind of note that this is not really possible. If it was true that they fabricated it, then it had to be the apostles, or, it would have to be Jewish people that came up with this plan. And so I don't think that would happen. They would normally not fabricate a story like this. To make it believable, they would have made all the witnesses men and not any of them women. And so I think this is a strong argument for the authenticity of the resurrection account, because a Jewish person, Jewish man, would not use women to be the authentication of the resurrection. And then we get to the part that I want to expand on for a little while. And that is in verse 17, Jesus replied, "Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. Go to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Now, before I get into this, I think it's interesting that Jesus talks about my Father and your Father. He's talking to Mary here. And so again, he's making this a relationship. Your Father and your God. And so as Mary starts to move toward Jesus, he told her not to touch him. And then later on the same day, he did allow women to actually touch him. And so what's the deal here? Why did he make this statement? And there's two basic theories that I want to cover. Number one, the Greek word used here for touch actually means to cling, to hold on to. And so Mary Magdalene wanted to cling to or hang on to Jesus so that he would not leave. But he says he has to go. And so he's just telling her, don't do that. But there's a second option from a Jewish perspective that I want to look at. And so we have to understand a little bit about the tabernacle and some different things and priests and so forth. And so let's kind of look at that. The second option revolves, I should say, around the statement, "For I have not yet ascended to my Father." So Jesus doesn't want to be touched because he hasn't gone to heaven or ascended to heaven. And so if we look at this from a Jewish perspective, it is directly related to the Mosaic Law, and it specifically is related to the high priest's activities on what's called the Day of Atonement. And that is described in Leviticus 16. And so you have to realize this is the high priest is one man coming from one tribe, coming from one nation to do this on one day of the year. And so let's start with kind of what he goes through. The high priest begins his day by removing the multicolored garments that he wore all the other days of the year. Okay? And I have a picture here in just a second. But once he undresses or takes off that multicolored garments, he goes through a ritual immersion. Okay? And then he puts on white garments. That symbolized purity, obviously, and he wore it just this one time a year on the Day of Atonement. And here's the picture I'm looking at, wanted to show you. You'll notice that he has 12 stones on the breastplate. Those represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And he's got just lots of colors and so on and so forth that are showing up here. And so he says, I have not yet ascended to my Father. After the procedure that the high priest goes through, he would then take off the white clothes and goes through a second ritual immersion. And then he puts back on those multicolored garments. Now this is interesting. If anyone touched the high priest between the first and second immersion, it rendered the high priest unclean. And if he's considered unclean, he could not enter the Holy of Holies to sprinkle the goat's blood on the mercy seat. And so he could not make atonement with the blood. So, kind of interesting. He's not to be touched between the first and second immersion. Therefore, until the ritual was completed, the high priest was untouchable. And so Hebrews makes an interesting statement here that I want to include. Indeed, according to the law, almost everything was purified with blood. And without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. Now, I want to talk about the tabernacle. The tabernacle that Moses built on earth is a copy of something that already existed in heaven. So we see that the tabernacle Moses built is a match or a copy of the tabernacle that already existed in heaven. Now, how was the earthly tabernacle to be cleansed? Well, we just talked about it. It had to be cleansed by animal blood in this case. And so there's also a heavenly tabernacle that I just talked about, a duplicate. How does it get cleansed? The heavenly tabernacle required cleansing by better blood, and that's from Hebrews as well. Better blood would be innocent human blood. Innocent means free of sin, no sin. And so just real quickly, this is what the tabernacle looked like. And you can see the temple is up at the top, the laver, and the bronze brazen altar, and so on and so forth. Now, if we take the tabernacle and kind of split it open here, you can see at the top left of the temple or tabernacle, you can see the Holy of Holies, and it's split with a veil there, right there. It splits the Holy of Holies from the holy place. So the whole thing is the tabernacle, but you'll see in the Holy of Holies there's a veil that separates the two. Okay, now let's look at Hebrews 9:23. It says, "So it was necessary for the sketches," that would be the copies, "the things in heaven to be purified with these sacrifices. But the heavenly things themselves required better sacrifices than goat's blood." And so my question at first is, did Jesus function as high priest? And he did. Jesus is the perfect high priest, and he ascended into heaven at some point to sprinkle his blood in the heavenly tabernacle to cleanse it. Now, while Jesus was on earth, he was a prophet. When resurrected, he was the priest, and then in the future, he will be the king. Hebrews 9:11 through 12 says, "But now Christ has come as the high priest," so there it tells us, "of the good things to come. He passed through the greater and more perfect tent," that be the tabernacle in heaven, "not made with hands, that is, not of this creation. And he entered once for all into the most holy place, not by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood. So he himself secured eternal redemption." And so I find this very interesting that it's talking about better sacrifices. And so again, verse 23, why did the heavenly tabernacle even need to be cleansed? I mean, it's in heaven. Well, if you remember, way back, Satan, who was a cherub, the cherub are the highest order of angels or celestial beings, had defiled it when he sinned. And we need to remember, though, that he was the highest angel possible at that time. So prior to his fall, before his fall, Satan actually had a priestly function. He led the other angels in the worship of God in heaven. He was covered with 10 special stones. The high priest had 12, and I'm not sure the difference or why the difference. But the same kind of stones that were set on the breastplate of the high priest. Okay, there just wasn't the same number of them. And notice in verse 14 of Isaiah, it says, I will climb up to the tops of the clouds. I will be the highest, and I will make myself like God, like the Most High. So Satan wanted to make himself like God. Now, when Satan sinned in heaven, he defiled the heavenly sanctuary. Ezekiel uses the plural sanctuaries because both of them, the holy place and the Holy of Holies, both of those were defiled. Because these are heavenly sanctuaries, they required cleansing by better blood, innocent human blood, as we spoke of earlier. So Jesus had to ascend into heaven to sprinkle his blood in the heavenly sanctuary. Now, what was Jesus' status when he encountered Mary Magdalene? Well, I'm suggesting, based on the things that I studied, his comment, Jesus' comment, says that he had not yet cleansed the heavenly tabernacle. Thus, he was in that stage, making him untouchable that we talked about for the high priest. Now, once he performed this duty as the perfect high priest, he could return from the heavenlies, and then people could touch him. Thomas touched him, the women touched him, and so on and so forth. So shortly after this, what happens? Well, it says in Matthew, Jesus met them, that's the other women, saying greetings. And what did they do? They came to him and held on to his feet. They touched him, and then they worshiped him. Okay, that's a wrap. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. And thanks for watching.